Hello, dear YouTube, and welcome to another episode of Peace of Mind. I'm Dharma Peace.
I'm Dharma Ocean.
And I'm Dharma Sense. Welcome to our channel.
Today we are going to discuss the Four Noble Truths.
Yeah, so the Four Noble Truths, as I indicated before, it is my favorite teaching. And the reason is because I think it has a lot of power to it in helping us understand suffering and how we can be free from it. So let's not use the word suffering right now. Let's say dukkha instead, because that's what it is in the Four Noble
I was
Truths.
going to say, I was going to comment on that, or, we can...
Yeah, we'll get into it more.
Okay.
So essentially the first Noble Truth is that in life there is dukkha. Dukkha is this idea that because the things that we experience in life are impermanent, meaning that they don't last very long, it's temporary. It causes us a lot of stress because we find ourselves constantly clinging to these things that are impermanent, and when they leave us, right? Like joy, for example, or for some people it's like drugs and alcohol. It's a temporary experience, and then when it leaves, you want more of it because you're not really satisfied in that experience. So when it leaves us, we are distraught, basically. And because of that, we want more of it. And we keep getting into this cycle of wanting where we're never really satisfied for very long. And that's dukkha, basically. Well, it's one form of it. There's plenty of forms of dukkha. The Buddha had mentioned 3 of them. I'll give kind of a quick rundown of that just so people kind of understand how broad this word is. Because typically it's translated as suffering, which works, but as long as you understand what that means in the context, we have to kind of redefine suffering. So in this instance, dukkha is birth, old age, sickness, death, not getting what you want, and being separated from the people that you care about. All of these things are kind of the ordinary forms of suffering that you are going to experience as a human being, and there's no if, and, or but about it. You're going to experience these things at some point. It doesn't matter your color, your creed, if you're rich or poor or whatever, gay, straight, it doesn't matter, you will experience this dukkha. And so the second noble truth is that the arising of this dukkha is craving or thirst. Thirst mainly for becoming more and more, to gain more, get something out of life. Thirst for sense pleasures. So like I had mentioned, drugs, alcohol, sex, food, anything that you get any kind of enjoyment out of, basically. And the last one is thirst for unbecoming. So you could think of that as like, I want to die, or I want to disintegrate or go into nothing, some kind of non-being state. Thirst for any of these 3 things will bring about some form of dukkha. And so the third noble truth, it's the cessation of this suffering or dukkha. And so the fourth noble truth is then the path that leads to that cessation, and that is the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path is something we're probably going to get into in another Delicious Dharma, so we won't talk about that too much.
Yeah.
We want to just talk about this idea of dukkha and the cessation of dukkha.
Traditionally, dukkha. Dukkha is how we would pronounce it in Pali. I like the definitions for it being unsatisfactoriness, but also like deficiency. I like to get into the Pali. I'm kind of a Pali nerd. So
I
dukkha,
think the literal translation of dukkha, isn't it a wheel off its axis?
Well, it doesn't really matter what you translate it to, as long as you understand what it means from a Buddhist lens. So like I said, old age, sickness, birth, and death, that is really what we're trying to overcome here with this whole dukkha thing.
There are a few more than just that. In the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, he lists birth, aging, sickness, death, sorrow and lamentation, pain, grief and despair, dissociation with the loathed, disassociation with the loved, not to get what one wants. In short, suffering is the 5 categories of clinging objects.
Whether it's being deficient or the wheel off its axis, it like has the same sensibility, right? Like it accomplishes the same thing, where it's like something's not quite right, it's not quite adequate.
Well, my understanding, I've got to say, has evolved over time. Even before I took refuge in the Buddha, and I was studying Buddhism probably since my 20s, I would read it as all life is suffering. right? And so,
Yeah,
like, what is that? Well, like, are you saying that all life is just nothing but miserable suffering?
yeah.
And I've come to understand that that's not really what is meant by that. Um, life, um, in life, there is suffering,
Mm-hmm.
right? But there's
Mm-hmm.
also everything is binary in this world. So there's always the opposite, right? If there's suffering,
Right.
there's also happiness, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just that all life will contain suffering. Even some happiness will contain some suffering. It's like you can say, the old cliche, there's a silver lining in every cloud. Well, in every, right? But the opposite is
Yeah.
also true.
Right. Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
cloud in every silver lining. So it's, you cannot escape suffering. At some point, you're going to suffer. And
Yeah.
speaking for myself personally, that's what attracted me to Buddhism.
Yeah.
Experiencing suffering in my life and wanting, to alleviate that. How's a way that I can alleviate that in a healthy, wholesome way and not
Yeah.
have to rely on drugs and alcohol, right?
Right. Right.
So, and it does provide, it's kind of like a doctor's prescription in a way. Like you go in there and they tell you what's wrong with you, right? There's suffering. Okay, you're suffering. Well, doc, is there a way out? Yes, there is.
The Buddha had basically noticed that this all begins with ignorance. Like what I mean by that is like he's basically saying that we're looking at life in the wrong way, and that's why our suffering is compounded. Like there's always going to be like when that dissatisfaction compounds, it's because we are telling a story about what's happening and compounding it with our own unskillful habits and our own minds. And I feel that is central to what the Buddha was trying to get at in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Or
Yep. But it's a certain type of dissatisfaction though, and the Buddha kind of helps to illustrate that in the parable of the two arrows.
Mhm.
So suppose that you get shot by an arrow. Of course, you're going to experience pain. It doesn't matter if you are enlightened or not. You will go, "Oh wow, I just got hit by an arrow and this hurts." It's an arrow in this time because there were no guns in the Buddhist time, right? So it's an arrow.
Yeah.
So you're penetrated by an arrow and you think, "Oh wow, like this really hurts. Oh, I'm suffering so much. Oh, what am I going to do? Am I going to die? I'm bleeding everywhere." When you have thoughts like that and you cling to this sensation of like, or rather you are averse to this sensation of pain in you, that's the dukkha, right? So when you
Mm.
think like, oh, why me? Why not that other guy? Things like that, that is where your dukkha is coming from, and it's actually making the problem worse. And so in this parable of the two arrows, it's kind of like, the first arrow is pain, the second arrow is your reaction to it, and you're basically stabbing yourself with another arrow and doubling your suffering, or you're doubling
Mhm.
your strife, or whatever you want to call it, stress.
We can understand dukkha and dissatisfaction through not knowing or ignorance, um, hate or aversion, which is what he says. He qualifies it as getting what you don't want,
Mhm.
and then the greed component, which is not getting what you want. So it's like whatever is happening with us, regardless, when dukkha starts to arise, it's because first of all we don't know how to grapple the issue. We don't know how to solve the issue or how to not allow it to be a quandary for our mind. So that would be the not knowing part. The aversion part is just desiring for the unwanted thing to go away or be or go away in any manner of speaking, whether it's like you lock it away or you push it away through aversion, right? And finally, not getting what you want, that's greed, right? Like you're seeking things through craving, like you want something that you don't have, or maybe you just want more of what you have. um, so those three aspects also, I think, illustrate dukkha or dissatisfactoriness. um, and I think, as with most things in the Buddhist lore, we like to weave things together as
Mhm.
though we were crocheting or something.
Mhm.
So But
Yeah, so the three defilements, like Peace had mentioned, those are pretty much one of the biggest factors for the arising of this dukkha or suffering, whatever you want to call it.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and but the thing to acknowledge though is that ignorance here doesn't necessarily mean just like a general lack of knowing, because no one can know everything. It's impossible to be
Right,
aware of every
yeah.
single thing forever, right? Like human
But
consciousness is so
it could
limited.
also be like, yeah, it could also be like just the desire to know. It could be just that. It could be like like I need to know the answer to why. But sometimes you just can't have the answer to that. Right? You're not going to get closure. And
Well, the
that lack of
ignorance in this
closure, yeah.
ignorance in this in terms of the defilements of mind or the three poisons like you mentioned,
Mm,
ignorance there is ignorance of a separate self. If you think that you exist separately from other people, that's the
well, yeah,
ignorance
for
we're
sure.
trying
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
clear up, basically. Like if you're ignorant about
Or
like,
like
oh,
like the Atman or everlasting self,
yeah,
like
exactly. So, I mean, the
yeah,
Buddha
right,
lived
right.
2,600 years ago where there was no technology and or like newspaper or anything like that. So how could he be aware of something happening in like North America? Like technically that would
Mhm.
be ignorant in the sense of like not really knowing or having awareness of it. But that's not the kind of ignorance we're talking about, right? We're talking about
Yeah, yeah.
this idea that I am separate and that there's that guy over there and then I have nothing to do with him. Like that is ignorance.
Right.
No, that is a very good point. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a deep
No.
concept. I think, for surface level Buddhism, it might be a little much for people to understand non duality or emptiness,
Mm, right.
which is what you're describing. But that is really what the true meaning of the first noble truth, right view, is that
Yeah. Yeah.
understanding, is understanding emptiness and understanding that we are not autonomous.
The Four Noble Truths. On it's just to kind of hinge on what you're saying, Dharma sense. The first of the Four Noble Truths lead us into the Noble Eightfold Path. So that like that is where right view and right understanding is, like that's the basis for that.
Kind of like how Sense mentioned, the reason why
Mm,
Buddhism is so attractive for Westerners is because of its claim of the cessation of this suffering that we all experience. Like, I mean, it's why I came to Buddhism. At first, it was from an intellectual standpoint of like, oh wow, this is so cool. The philosophy is so fascinating, and the things that they say about the mind are so like unique and so foreign
mm-hmm.
for me as an American. But then as I get deeper, I'm like, wait a second, the Buddha. I mean, there's a reason why they call him the Buddha. He essentially teaches two things, which is the nature of suffering, the cessation of suffering. We all want to be
Right.
free
Yeah.
from suffering. Every single person on this world. Like, if you don't
Mhm.
want to, if you're sitting there thinking, I don't want to be free from suffering, well, then you don't have a good understanding of suffering then, because, or maybe you're not experiencing it enough. You don't really know what I mean by that, but like, all of us want that, right? I mean, and that's what was so attractive for me in this practice.
I would say in my life, all of my bad behavior that I've ever done, committed, came from a place of suffering and from a place of ignorance. Because when I was younger, I felt like a victim, right? And then I would sort of drown my sorrows in alcohol, and then I would feel guilty and suffer from the guilt and then the
Yeah.
self contempt for that kind of behavior. And so all my suffering, even though it was happening internally, I thought was external,
Mm,
that it was
mm-hmm.
something that
Mm-hmm.
was happening to me from the outside. And so this is how I'm going to fix it by, dulling my senses, et cetera, and then just compounding the problem. And finally realizing instead of my mind mastering me, I actually have an opportunity to master my mind.
Right.
And that's the difference, right?
Yeah.
And that's really the key is like, okay, well, this is the prescription. I'm suffering a lot. How can I make this stop? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, here's a way.
Yeah.
Check
And
this out.
what you described is what I call the Dukkha feedback loop, where you're like, you have an unwholesome situation, and then it leads into self-medication of some kind, and that compounds that issue, and then it creates more suffering, and it spirals, right? And
Yep.
we all know that it spirals. And like you so bravely admitted about that, I suffered from that um through violence, because I thought like that was going to, and that's just a super like, an exaggerated form of aversion, where I was just trying to change my own suffering through lashing out at others.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole series on Dukkha and the Four Noble Truths and everything. It connects to literally everything the Buddha had taught. It's so deep. So we're not going to be, I mean, we're just scratching the surface in this episode. Yeah, so the thing is about this Four Noble Truths teaching is that it sounds really pessimistic on the surface. Like, oh, all life is suffering, and oh, like, everything we do, I'm just going to suffer. My life is miserable. It's really not like that. Like, the idea is to kind of shake you and wake you up and say, hey, you are causing a lot of your own problems, and this is why. So you need to do something about it instead of just sitting in your own misery in this feedback loop, like how Sense was talking about. You're causing a lot of your own problems, so you just got to come off of it, Like, and I relate a lot to that, what he was saying, like feeling sorry for yourself and then like using drugs or alcohol to kind of help your problem instead of just dealing with it, instead of meditating, instead of finding some kind of productive method to deal with your problems. But it's not always suffering. Like, of course we experience joy, but the problem about joy is that it's temporary. It doesn't last for very long. But on the flip side, dukkha is also temporary. So now we have something to kind of like have hope for, is like, oh, I'm not going to suffer forever. And I can at the very least be grateful for that sometimes like there's going to be ups and downs, just like a roller coaster. That's how life is. It's never going to be consistent for very long before it just changes again. But if you can learn to just be okay with that and just kind of ride the waves, then suddenly, and that's the equanimity, like what we talked about in the first Delicious Dharma of Brahma Viharas. If we just learn how to just ride those waves instead of being reactionary and constantly like clinging or being averse to all these experiences we have, then we can learn to just be chill, and then we're not so fazed by life anymore. Understanding
impermanence is a big deal. It really is. Understanding that your happiness, hey, it's great while it lasts. It's not going to last forever. You're suffering. Sorry, it's not going to last forever. You're going to be right.
That is a perfect segue into basically what are called the degrees of dukkha, which I can quickly qualify for you. The first is dukkha, which we just call pain. The second is viparinama dukkha, which is change and impermanence. It's related to that. And then the third is sankhara dukkha, which is the conditioned states. We start to come into the truths about the what are called like the three marks of existence by the Buddha. That everything that we experience is impermanent. That's anicca. It's unsustainable, which again relates to dukkha. And the third is that it's uncontrollable, which actually has to do with the illusion of the self, like the anatta in Pali. As we're used to being like agents as human beings and manipulating things in our surroundings, we have this conditioned state to where we think that we have control of what happens in our lives, but that is just an illusion. So that is where I started to talk about how dukkha becomes phenomenological, or has to do with phenomena, how we're experiencing the marks of existence in our lives, meaning like how things are in the real world and how we interact with it. This causes the phenomenon of craving, actually, tanha. Regardless of anything, we are subjected to dukkha. So like that, so basically it is like a default state of where we are living. All Dhamma, all conditioned things and extant things are subjected to this phenomenon, which is dukkha.
Right, and it's because it's impermanent that we find ourselves getting caught in this cycle. I get the thing that I want. It lasts for a little while, and then it's gone. And then now I've realized, oh, that I liked that thing. It made me happy, right? And so now I want more of it. And then the next time I get it, it has diminishing returns until eventually I'm just like addicted or something. So how do we get out of that cycle? Well, we have to do something about this ignorance, right? I need to realize that this thing isn't actually giving me much happiness. It's really creating more problems for me, and that's why addiction
Mm,
is such a big struggle for people. Um,
yeah.
you
And
know,
there are many forms of addiction, so it doesn't just mean substance abuse.
that's right.
It
Yeah.
can be,
Ever seen
yeah.
that show, My Strange Addictions? Like, there's this girl who's addicted to
Yeah.
eating her own hair, and you're thinking like,
Oh God,
aren't you gonna
yeah.
run out eventually or something? And like, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
If there's suffering, all life there is suffering. That means everybody suffers, right?
Mm,
And so, as I suffer, you suffer. As for myself, so for others. So
mm,
if I want for my own suffering to be less, as for myself, so for others, I want other people's suffering to also be less, because we all are in this together. So that
exactly.
is, I
Yeah.
think, where compassion is born, and where I would even go as
Mm,
far as to say that compassion is one of the sort of uh, fundamental states of nature, right?
yeah.
Because compassion, in fact, percolates up unbidden, right? With somebody, your parent or relative or somebody is ill, and you feel, you're upset, that it's not, you're not creating that feeling, right? That's a natural occurrence, right? So it comes up by on its own. It's a fundamental part of our nature. I think every human feels compassion, so we all have that connection, right? And it's just
Yeah.
a fundamental state of nature.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of a quote by Ledi Sayadaw, who was an influential Theravada Buddhist monk.
Hmm.
And he was a scholar of the Pali Canon. It actually is one of the reasons we have a lot of this text available to us. Basically, he's drawing the parallel of non-duality, where it's sukha and dukkha. There's the ease and dis-ease, like there's an interplay of the two, and
Hmm.
but ultimately, the Buddha said that ultimately that still is dukkha, and I think that was something that Ocean, I remember when your first days at the temple, you would come and say, "Well, isn't pleasure dukkha? Isn't that dukkha?" And I'm like, this reminds me of Ocean, what he was saying, because Sayadaw kind of hints at that.
The reason
Um,
why pleasure is also dukkha is because it conditions more craving. So when you get something
exactly.
that you
Yeah.
like and you're like, oh man, I really like this thing, you
Yeah.
get into that feedback loop that we've been talking about, that
Yeah.
craving, and then that's where your suffering's coming from. So when you're
Right.
constantly pursuing pleasure, that is why you're going to have all these issues. If you're pursuing pain as well, of course you're going to have issues in that way
Yeah.
too. And that's why the Buddha's practice is called the middle way.
A lot of people have a notion of the hereafter. Like,
Mhm.
my problems are going to be such that until the time comes when they finally are over, but the Buddha was like, that's never going to happen.
Yeah. Right.
You're not going to be that until you know how to anchor yourself in the here and the now and
Right.
be content with just sitting.
I'll be happier when I get that
Yeah,
new
yeah,
job. I'll be happier when I
yeah,
get that bigger house. I'll be happier. It's like, yeah, always putting off.
Yep.
Right.
People are
well,
constantly putting conditions on their happiness as if they can't
Yeah.
just be
uh-huh,
happy right now. There's no condition for happiness, right? Like, if you are free in your
yeah,
mind, the only way to do that is to let go of these ideas of what you think happiness is. Then you will be truly
Let
happy.
go. Let it go, baby. Let
Yeah,
it
let it
go.
go.
That's
yeah,
where
listen
it's
to
at.
Elsa.
That's the Buddhist practice. Let it go.
Yeah, yeah, that
Let
that
go.
Disney cartoon's starting to make a lot of sense, right?
Hmm.
I was trying to mention the parable of the king. So, like, there was a king that approached the Buddha, and he said, "How are you so wise, and why are you so loved and followed by so many?" He's like, "I have all the power. I have everything that I want. You think you're so clever? Like, what makes you such? Why? What makes you so?" And the Buddha said, "Well, you have all these things. You have dancing girls. You've got musicians. You've got feasts. You have your subjects, the people who serve you, your slaves. But can you just sit there and just sit still for however many hours and just be happy?" And the king said, "Sure, of course I could do that." But I mean, the Buddha put him to the test. And it goes that the king sat for certain amounts of time, until eventually he broke and said, "I don't know how you can do this." Like, and the Buddha said, "Well, see, that's why."
The thing is, that's so relatable though, because anyone who, like, when they first start meditation, they are that king. They go, "Oh my
Yeah.
God, how does somebody sit here for 2 hours and not do a single thing except breathe?"
Mhm.
And yeah,
I've
Yeah, it
almost
wa-
panicked in meditations before, especially like in meditations, like in a guided meditation, or not guided, but a timed meditation where it's just pure silence. I've been in, like, when I first started meditating, like, my God, I don't think I can do this. I'm going to break. I'm going to, like, where it starts to, like, really, like, I'm going to explode. It can be like that, where it almost turns into a panic. Um, it's
Yeah.
difficult for people to sit still. And I think too that for a lot of people, myself included, until I started this practice, my internal dialogue was often just very unkind,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know? And I bet a lot of people can relate to that. Um, and you start to learn that you aren't your thoughts, right? And you aren't your necessarily even feelings. Your essence is something different. It's something greater. And all of these are just temporary fluctuations that you're experiencing, but again, they are impermanent. And there's you don't have to
Mhm.
sit and suffer.
The first time a practitioner really tries to sit, then comes samudaya. Samudaya is the Pali word for arising, right?
Mm.
And that actually is the second of the Four Noble Truths, is that the craving starts to arise. The that is exactly what's happening. Is like it's arising, and all of a sudden you're like, I can't stand this anymore. It's this is an ordeal, and I gotta move. And
yeah.
and
No,
that's
yeah, I've
when
had all kinds of experiences during meditation.
yeah.
So in my daily practice, I do 30 minutes a day. Today, I I don't think I had more than 5 minutes where I was actually on my breath. It was just thinking, thinking, thinking. Oh, what's the answer
Mhm.
to this koan? Oh, maybe it's this, and then becoming obsessed with some stupid thought. You know what I mean? It's like,
The monkey mind.
yeah, the monkey mind just swinging from
Yeah.
branch to branch, never really being able to just settle in on the breath. It's like, I mean, and I think that it's like that. I've talked to our Roshi from the temple. He pretty
Mhm.
much says the same thing. Like, yeah, still after
Yeah.
35 years of
Yeah.
practice, there's still a struggle with this kind of stuff. But the thing
And there's
is,
other times you get really, like, I don't know about you guys, but like, where it's really like you're there, right?
of
You
course,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's times
Yeah,
when you're in the pocket and times when you're not in the pocket, and that's just how it
yeah.
is with meditation. So for our viewers,
Yeah.
if you're sitting there thinking, "Oh no, like I experienced all this suffering, I don't know what to do about it. So someone help me." If you're not meditating, that is where you should start. And it doesn't have to be very
Mm.
long. You don't have to be like us doing, these sessions where you're doing like 8 hours a day or whatever. You can start small. Do like 5 minutes. Start
5 minutes.
experimenting with different forms of meditation. You can try metta bhavana. You can try
Mhm.
aranasati, breathing meditation. You can try vipassana. You can try all different kinds of meditation. Find the one that works for you. Do 5 minutes a day. And I'm telling you, over time, you're going to start to notice the changes. It won't be immediate. It's not going to see it in a week, 2 weeks, probably not even a month. But over time, you'll start to realize that your problems aren't really much problems anymore, and they're just kind of life.
Yeah, they're impermanent, and yeah,
And be
they're not
comfortable too.
everlasting.
Your posture. There are different postures. I think some people try to do the double lotus like right off the bat, and there's no need to.
Right. Yeah, we all try to impress from the beginning
Yeah, you don't
stages,
need to
right?
be, standing on your head doing a hula hoop, while you're meditating. Like, you can just do it in a chair. One of my
Yeah.
favorite postures during meditation, especially for long periods, is seiza. And you
Mhm.
basically just kind of sit on your heels, and if that's too uncomfortable for you, like your legs start to give out, you can do what I do and just sit on a cushion, something that's high, maybe about this tall, so that you have space between your heels, so that you're not hurting your ankles. And I can sit like
Right.
that for 30 minutes and be comfortable. So start experimenting with different postures if you experience pain. But just meditate. Just try it, please.
Yeah.
Oh, I love Seiza. Martial artists do it a lot, actually. So that's how I got into doing it, was actually doing Japanese martial arts. And but Seiza is just like where you're kind of you got yourself, you start in a kneeling position, and then you rest your buttocks onto your heels, and that
It's
would
actually what Qui-Gon Jinn is doing when he's waiting for Darth Maul in Revenge of the Sith.
That's right.
But yeah,
Yeah,
meditate.
so
Do your meditation.
meditate.
So I
Yeah.
mean, that's more or less part of the Noble Eightfold Path, right? That is the fourth noble truth, the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. Meditation is absolutely key to this because, without getting too deep into it, one of the aspects is right concentration. And it's not the only way, but the best way to cultivate this concentration is through your meditation. And with your concentrated mind, you'll be able to kind of look at things with a different view. You'll start to see things as they are rather than as you want them to be or as you expect them to be or whatever.
Yeah, and that is really where you start to see that the nature of suffering or dissatisfaction, unsatisfactoriness, not being at ease, that stuff is temporary, and you can just let it go.
Yep.
And it's a product of your own mind, right? It's a
Mhm.
product of your own ignorance. It's a product of your delusion. And so how are we going to, address this problem? We're going to heal our mind, and we're going to heal our mind through meditation, which is where you're going to alleviate your suffering, is through your concentration and recognizing that the problems are internal and not external, and you can see that they're impermanent, and you can see your own folly, and participation in the suffering that you're experiencing.
Sorry to say, but the Buddha places the responsibility squarely on you. Good luck with that. No, but no, but that's actually that's not totally true. We have the teachings, which is the Dhamma, and we have the Sangha, which is the community of people. And it doesn't have to be a Buddhist community. It could just be your family and supporters around you, and take refuge in them, and that alleviates suffering as well.
It's not the problem that's occurring, it's our reaction to it, right? We can choose how we're going to react to any situation, right? You go on vacation and it rains outside, and your mom's complaining about it raining, but you're like, I'm on vacation, it's great, right? And so it's just, how are you going to look at it?
It's trying to be proactive, not reactive, right? Like you don't want to just live life reacting to everything and being subjected to the stimuli, and then your reaction to that, and then just because there's no prudence there, there's no judgment, there's no discernment in that regard. So
you eventually start figuring it out as you meditate. You start the meditation is so valuable because it teaches you from direct experience how to let go of these things that you're thinking of, these feelings that are arising. And when you learn how to let go in the meditation, you carry that into your normal life. And now suddenly, this guy cutting me off on the highway, it doesn't bother me. I'm not phased at all. He cuts, cuts me off, but in reality is he's just getting in the other lane because he needs that lane. And I go, okay, cool. I would have done that too. And now I'm not upset anymore. I can let it go, and I feel free. I feel good, and
that whole thing where you think this person's cutting you off and you got indignant about it, it's all in your head, man. You know why I know that? Because I lived in Japan and they don't have this concept. It just isn't a thing. Oh yeah, they'll be like, oh, bikurista, meaning oh, it surprised me, that somebody flew in front of you. But it's more like that. It's just a thing that happened, and the person.
Yeah, they don't get offended by that. They don't take it personally.
Right.
Like, oh, how dare this guy?
Yeah.
Doesn't he know who I am?
And,
it's only in your head, man.
It's just in there. It's just, it's not out there. It's in there, because that person has already gone, and
it is. It's always in there. It's always in there. Again, you always have the choice how you're going to react. And one thing that meditation has helped me with personally is being able to pause and not instantly react, like not have a knee-jerk reaction that I'm going to regret.
Mhm.
Take a deep breath. Take 3 through the
Yeah.
nose.
The Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh said that everything can be fixed through our breathing. I can be happy, just return to myself, the present moment. In those 3 breaths, what are we actually doing though? We're kind of we're saying, okay, I'm pausing my reaction, stopping that. Then I'm letting it go, letting go of the perceived problem, and then I'm vowing to not do anything unskillful, right? Like that I would say that would be
You're going
wise.
to handle whatever situation you're faced with in a calmer manner,
Exactly.
in a more rational manner,
Mhm.
right? Than just flying off the handle if it's a case of aversion or anger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically, if you want to do something about your suffering, 2 things. Start acting with good moral conduct. Treat people well. Treat yourself well. And the second thing is start meditating. And like I said, even if it's only 5 minutes a day, do these 2
Yeah.
things, and I'm telling you, over time, your life will get better. You don't have to
Yeah.
allow this suffering to just completely overwhelm you.
Yeah, we can say
I
amen to that.
second that. Yeah, amen to that. Yeah, definitely. Be kind to yourself and meditate
Hmm.
for sure. And I think it was Bob Dylan who said, "Them dreams, they're only in your head."
That's right. If you got to the end of this video, we want to say sadhu 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 to you.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Congratulations.
sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And who knows, maybe the next video, I feel the next Delicious Dharma, I should say.
Yes,
should
this was
probably
a Delicious Dharma
maybe
episode.
yeah.
Oh, by the
Maybe we
way, now
should
that
do
you've been
earlier.
listening this whole time.
But you'll see in the title, okay? But maybe, I guess we can start talking about Magga, the fourth noble truth, right? I mean, which is the noble eightfold path. One thing leads to another in Buddhist Dharma, right? So
Yep.
right, brothers.
In the
And
next episode of Delicious Dharma,
What
Ocean
will we
battles
say?
peace about the Noble Eightfold Path.
What will he say next? Find out. All right. So, all right, my friends, our friends. Okay, until next time. This is Peace of Mind signing out.